Welcome, Game Chasers everywhere, to episode 29 of Collecting Confidant with your host, GunstarHero. And I'm back this week with yet another Metroidvania. This one is a spiritual successor to a legendary series I cover a lot on this channel. This week, of course, we're talking about Monster Boy and the Cursed Kingdom, which now has a physical pre-order for the PS5 in glorious 4K and up to 120 frames a second via limitedrungames.com, and is now open for pre-order until Sunday, October the 30th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This was previously released for the PS4 and Switch physically a couple years back. I, of course, have the PS4 version, and if you have this, it will actually give you an unlock to the free PS5 upgrade, so you can try that out for yourself. And if you are looking for the PS4 and Switch versions, you still can buy them physically at retail, although copies are dwindling. It's been a while, and especially the Switch version is going up in value, so I will be getting into those shortly. But let's talk about the game and why it is a worthy spiritual successor to, again, a classic game series, which of course would be the Wonder Boy and Monster World series. And this game is a spiritual successor to one of the best games in that series, which of course would be Wonder Boy 3, The Dragon's Trap. And of course, if you're paying attention to a couple episodes ago on the Solar Report, I did cover the remake of The Dragon's Trap as well. So it actually worked out timing-wise, because now I've only been about a couple weeks out since The Dragon's Trap, so it's nice that I can talk about that in relation to Monster Boy and how they compare and contrast as entities within the same universe, albeit with different names, and we'll get into all of that shortly. So, in a nutshell, Monster Boy and the Cursed Kingdom is a retro-inspired 2D platforming, action-adventure, Metroidvania with light RPG elements, which again brings it firmly in line with Wonder Boy 3, The Dragon's Trap, very similar in vein, although Monster Boy definitely brings a lot of things to it that bring it into the modern age with a lot of quality of life improvements. So, very briefly, the story, you play as Jin, who his uncle, Naboo, has gone crazy. Apparently, he stole the king's royal nectar and has now gone on a rampage throughout the Monster World Kingdom, transforming all the inhabitants into various monsters. So, as the game begins, you start as Jin, go on this little mini quest to find your uncle and confront him as to what's been going on with the rest of the kingdom. You eventually do find him, but are interrupted by a big boss battle with a giant squid. Well, once you actually best the squid, your uncle comes back in and then curses you and transforms you into a pig, the first of the various animal transformations you're going to come across in this game. And of course, if that pig looks a bit familiar with that eye patch and that cigarette, well, we'll get into how that pig got into this game very shortly and the connections to that other Monster World and Wonder Boy universe. But anyway, back to Monster Boy. So essentially, you'll turn into the pig, and then next, you'll go to the town of Lupia and seek out the court magician Mysticat, who will inform you that you actually need to find these several magical orbs to restore the kingdom to its proper place and transform all the humans back into their proper form. So this is the quest. You're going to go find all these magical orbs, and essentially, like Wonder Boy 3, The Dragon's Trap before it, every time you confront and beat a boss, you will unlock another one of these orbs that will unlock a new animal form that you'll transform into. And each of these animal forms has different abilities associated with it. So, of course, like I said, you start with the pig. The pig's special abilities is that he can do a butt bounce, a punch, and he can also use his snout to sniff out clues and secret levers. After that, you're going to transform into Snake Man, who can cling to walls, spit venom, squeeze into tiny areas and little wormholes. After that, you'll transform into Frogman, who can use his tongue to activate switches and spin the world around, and also swim underwater to unlock all those cool underwater caverns. After that, you'll have Lion Man, who can do upward and downward thrusts through blocks and dashing attacks through barriers. And finally, you have the Dragon Man form, who can fly around, spit fireballs, and breathe fire, in addition to allowing you to fly through some shoot-'em-up sequences. So, a lot of cool transformations you can unlock here, and the game itself, being a Metroidvania, of course, has to have good light RPG elements, so it's non-linear in its gameplay. You will collect money and gems and potions from the enemies you beat, and then in turn, you can go to different merchants and spend this money to buy gear, weapons, upgrades. You can also find tons of secrets. There are so many secrets in this game in terms of secret chests that contain upgrade gems where you can add extra buffs to your armor and your gear. And then the armor and gear itself is alchemic in the sense that depending on what type of armor, what type of bracelets, what type of sword you have, all these things will work together to give you different buffs and different strengths. So there's a lot of depth in terms of the RPG elements of this game and how you can approach combat and make it truly unique to yourself, or at least address different situations, because even though this is a platformer and it definitely fits within that vein and there's a lot of challenging platforming here, I would almost say that the puzzle solving elements take precedence here, and that I would even say that's more of a priority. That if you're into puzzle solving, this is definitely your game. Whereas if you're not, and I'll admit, I'm not the best with puzzle games. I did have to check a strategy guide a few times on this game. So if you're into like that kind of obtuse thinking outside of your head stuff, this is definitely for you. But if not, this may pose a challenge because the puzzle solving is so strong in this game that it actually will require you to progress forward throughout the plot at certain stages. And if you're not up to it, you might have a tough time. And I will say a major criticism of this game would be the fact that some of the puzzles are so obscure, especially one. Oh, there was one puzzle that has to do with a cork. I'm not going to get too much more into it. I will admit that I was a little turned off by the fact that you actually have to check a strategy guide in certain instances of this game, but it's a minor gripe in the face of this overall being a very sumptuous and lengthy Metroidvania. This is a very long game. Originally, it was intended to be about 10 to 12 hours. I would say just to finish the base story will take you about roughly 12 to 15 hours, and if you want to 100% it and get all the secrets and complete the entire map, you're looking at about another 23 to 24 hours. So there's definitely a lot to sink your teeth into and a lot of bang for your buck. And I would say that the game, even though it's long, never feels like it drags because there's constantly something to upgrade, new abilities to learn, and the world is so massive. So let's talk a little bit about how Monster Boy compares to its predecessor, Wonder Boy 3, The Dragon's Trap. Of course, the main similarity is the fact that you can transform into these different animal forms and traverse this Metroidvania, which is directly inspired by Wonder Boy 3, The Dragon's Trap. But I would say from a gameplay, an emotion, and an animation perspective, I would say that this game has more in common with Wonder Boy and the Monster World off Sega Genesis, where it just has that same feel, that same style. So I definitely say it borrows a lot more gameplay-wise from that in terms of its flow. But then also, the love and the reverence for the Wonder Boy series does not stop there. You're also going to see direct influences from Wonder Boy 3 Monster's Lair, which only came out in Japan, the arcades, and the Mega Drive, and that was one of the shmup titles in the series where you're actually going to have shoot 'em up sequences in Monster Boy, which I thought was a great diversion from the action, really gave it some diversity in terms of gameplay mechanics, and was overall enjoyable, and is a nod to some of Game Atelier's early work. Game Atelier, of course, being the developer of this, and the publisher being FDG Entertainment. So also in terms of similarities and contrast to The Dragon's Trap, I would say that, yes, The Dragon's Trap is a lot shorter, whereas that game can be completed in a few hours. This obviously is a lot longer, but then you've also got the characters. And this is completely intentional and not by coincidence. For example, let's start with the first animal you transform into, the pig with the eye patch. That right there is the smoking pig shopkeeper from The Dragon's Trap. Also, you're going to see enemies like the fire-spitting sunflower and the cloud with the sunglasses. And you may be wondering, how did they get all the assets from the Wonder Boy games and the Monster World games into the Monster Boy game without it being the same type of game? Well, let's explain. Historically, this game was actually intended to be a sequel to Game Atelier's 2010 shmup Flying Hamster, which originally came out on the iOS, the PSP, got an HD version on the PlayStation Vita, which is where I originally played it. And again, this was just a very rudimentary shoot 'em up, but had definitely a passing affiliation with Wonder Boy 3 Monster's Lair. And I did listen to an interview with the director of Game Atelier, and he said that Wonder Boy was a big inspiration on him growing up, so much so that when he went to kickstart the sequel, Flying Hamster 2, and this one was going to be called Night of the Golden Seed, he went to kickstart this as an homage to Wonder Boy 3 The Dragon's Trap. So he was going to make a Metroidvania type of game with retro style graphics, and it had so many similarities to that universe that he actually went to the creator of Wonder Boy, Ryuichi Nishizawa, to get his blessing during the Kickstarter. So this was about a week before he actually launched the Kickstarter, where he got in contact with Nishizawa to get his blessing to make the game in the similar style. So the Kickstarter gets launched, and then about a few days into the campaign, Nishizawa actually got back to Fabian and told him, hey, I'm really on board with this game, and I'd actually like to even provide some guidance to it. So not only did he get his blessing, but he got the involvement in Nishizawa too. So that was a big boon to the project in terms of getting confidence for the investors to get this off the ground. So much so that the publisher FDG then approached Game Atelier and say, wow, you actually got Nishizawa on this project. You know what? Why don't you just go cancel the Kickstarter? We're going to publish this game for you. We're going to help you develop Flying Hamster 2 into whatever you need it to be. So that's where this began. But then it got so good in terms of the concept that was being worked on, in terms of the clout that's getting behind it. They even got the blessing of some major Japanese composers like Michiru Yamane of the Castlevania series, that the LAT Corporation partnered up in 2017 with Game Atelier to actually transform this from a flying hamster game into a full-on successor to the Monster World series. Because here's the thing, even though Sega owned the rights to the name Wonder Boy and Monster World, Nishizawa still owned all the lore, the assets, and the characters from the Monster World series, and he basically told Game Atelier, you guys can have at it, have access to all the assets you need, and hence the framework for Monster Boy and the Cursed Kingdom began. So this is where it fleshed out into a full-on spiritual successor with all the lore, and graphically, the original intention was to go with like a retro pixel art style, but over the development, Demolinier realized that, hey, this is like the modern age. We don't want to just go back to the old school. We want to bring this into the modern age. So he said, okay, we're going to go with a hand-drawn HD style that's going to take full advantage of modern technology. And then because of the partnership with FDG, they were also able to attract some major heavy-duty composers to do the soundtrack for this. And what they said was that the soundtrack was about 50% new compositions and 50% arrangements of the original soundtrack from Dragon's Trap. But what they did to add some extra oomph to the soundtrack was they brought in some of the best of Japanese composers for video games, and we're talking about major talents like Michiru Yamane, who was responsible for Castlevania and Suikoden and the Bloodstained series. They also brought in Yuzo Koshiro, who's famous for Streets of Rage and Revenge of Shinobi, and also Motoi Sakuraba, who's famous for the Dark Souls series and the Tales series. So you'll definitely hear in the soundtrack, which is gorgeous, and it's a nice fitting companion piece to the Dragon's Trap because it definitely uses a very similar hand-drawn style, orchestral arranged compositions that really added that flair. Again, my only minor gripe with the game is the fact that the puzzle solving can be a little obtuse and obscure at times, and the platforming can be a little bit intimidating to newcomers. But overall, if you are a fan of old school platformers with RPG elements, Metroidvania design, and some very insane puzzling, this will definitely be something up your alley. Let's talk about the physical versions to wrap up this video. So of course, like I said before, Monster Boy and the Cursed Kingdom, I originally had the PS4 version, but now you can get this on PS5 via limitedrungames.com, which is now open for pre-order until Sunday, October the 30th, 2022 at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's going to get both a standard version for $39.99 US, and then of course the collector's version for $79.99, which is going to include the game itself, a big box, a 2-disc CD soundtrack full of all these wonderful compositions. There's going to be a cloth map and a 64-page hardcover book, so definitely something cool for the fans. But if you're still looking for the PS4 and the Switch versions, you can still get them via Amazon.com and some other retailers. The PS4 version goes for about $48, so not too bad, but the Switch version was in heavy demand, is dwindling in terms of copies, and goes for about $120 sealed. So a little pricey if you're looking for the Switch version, but it's still there if you want to get it. So I definitely recommend this for fans of Metroidvania, although if you are adverse to puzzles and don't like the fact that you have to use a strategy to kind of get ahead in the game, I would definitely be wary of that. Otherwise, a great love letter to a legendary series and a worthy spiritual successor to one of the greatest 8-bit games of all time. You've been watching episode 29 of The Collecting Confidant with your host, GunstarHero. Make sure you like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Later, Game Chasers, and peace.